Hi, welcome everyone. In today's video clip, we're going to be talking about the Pythagorean theory. And basically what I have behind me is a right triangle. Now, this only works if you have a right triangle. If you don't have a right triangle, you have to come up with a couple of strategies or a couple of ways to create a right triangle. Well, basically, if I know two of my side lengths in a right triangle, then I can figure out the third side length. And that's basically how the Pythagorean theory works. I've got this A, and I've got this B, and I've got this C. If I know A and B, then I can calculate how long side C is. If I know B and C, then I can figure out how to find A and vice versa. So throughout this video, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to solve these types of problems using the Pythagorean theory. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to be discussing the Pythagorean theory. And basically, the Pythagorean theory says if I know two side lengths, then I can figure out the third side length. And this is how it works. I've got this right triangle behind me. Now, this only works for a right triangle, so keep that in mind. My height is 3 and my base is 4. And what I want to do is I want to figure out the hypotenuse. I don't know how long that length is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the Pythagorean theory. And the Pythagorean theory basically states a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And if you go back to the last video, right before this one, I kind of labeled the triangle A, B, and C. Now, here's the easiest way that I remember it. I always call B my base length. I always call my B my base length. Why? Because base starts with B. My C length is going to be my hypotenuse. And then last but not least, the hypotenuse, if you don't know, it's the slanted side in a triangle, and the easiest way to remember is the right angle always points to the hypotenuse. So if that helps you, use it. If you know a different way to remember where the hypotenuse is, make sure you use that as well. But if I know where the right angle is, the right angle will always point to the hypotenuse. So I know where the hypotenuse is, and I know where the base is, and the last part of the triangle is basically this part right here where the 3 is, and that would be my height. It would be the height of my triangle. And so basically what I do here is my A value is height. And I'm going to square that. So the Pythagorean theory basically states this. I'm going to take the height, I'm going to square it. I'm going to add it to my base, and I'm going to square it. And that's all going to equal my hypotenuse squared. So I'm going to walk you through this problem. I'm going to show you how this works. First of all, instead of A, I'm going to substitute my height in. So my height is 3. And I'm going to make sure that I square that. Now, my base is 4. And I'm going to make sure I square that. And then the last part is, I can write out the word hypotenuse, or I can write c squared. Okay? Whichever way you feel easier. If you want to write out the word hypotenuse so you don't forget, use it. Now, 3 times 3. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16, is equal to c squared. I'm going to add these two values up. 9 plus 16. 9 plus 16 is 25. C squared. Now, this is where a lot of kids get a little confused. They get to this last part and they don't know what to do. Well, the opposite of addition is subtraction. The opposite of multiplication is division. The opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root of that number. So what I'm going to do here is this. I'm going to take the square root of 25, and I'm going to take the square root of c squared. Now, there is a shortcut of doing all of this. What you could say to yourself is this. what two numbers can I multiply to make 25, but they have to be the same number? If you can do that in your head, think of two numbers that you multiply to make 25, but those two numbers have to be exactly the same. If you can do that in your head, go for it. If not, do it this way. I look at this problem now, and here's the funny part about a number being squared, taking the square root. What happens is the square and the square root kind of knock each other out. They both get eliminated. Because let's just think about this. If I take 2 and I square it, 2 times 2 is 4. And then I take the square root of 4, the square root of 4 goes back to 2. So anytime I square a number and then take the square root, I end up with the number. Now, this is just a variable. We just have c. If I square the variable, then take the square root, I just end up with the variable. And then last but not least, 25. What two numbers can I multiply to make 25, but they have to be the same number? That would be 5. So this is how it works with the Pythagorean theory. What we have to do is a couple of calculations here. You could skip this step if you can do this step in your head. 25 is equal to c squared, and I just say to myself, gee, what two numbers can I multiply to make 25? But keep in mind, when we were doing the Pythagorean theory, first of all, we needed a right triangle, and we needed to remember our formula. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And remember, height squared plus base squared equals hypotenuse squared. And I made the base the second value. I made it, I said instead of b, I'll just make it the base value. So hopefully that helps you as you go through this. In the next video, I'm going to show you what happens when we know the hypotenuse and one of the side lengths and not the other side length. Hi, welcome back everybody. We're talking about the Pythagorean theory. And the Pythagorean theory states that if you have a right triangle and you know two of the side lengths, then you can calculate the third side length. Now, this only works for a right triangle, so keep that in mind. What I have here is my formula. I've got my a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And the way I wrote it out was this. I always think of the b value as my base. Why? Because base starts with the letter b. So I've got my height squared plus my base squared equals my hypotenuse squared. Now, here's what I need to do. I've got this right triangle. What I really need to do is label the sides. I need to figure out what I have so I can start to substitute. So if I look at this triangle, I see that my right angle is right here. And it's a right angle. Why? Because of this little symbol, which means it's a 90-degree angle. And here's the best way to remember where the hypotenuse is. The right angle always points to the hypotenuse. So if that helps you remember, use it. If you know a different way of where to find the hypotenuse, use that as well. But that's the easiest way for me to remember. That little right angle just points to the hypotenuse. Now, I look at the other lengths in my triangle. And if I'm thinking that this triangle is just standing up, maybe on a table or something like that, on a flat surface, this part of the triangle that's touching the table or the flat surface, well, that would be the base of my triangle. And so if I know the bottom is the base, and I know the hypotenuse, then the third side length has to be my height. So now that I know what I have, I've got the height and I've got the hypotenuse. What I need to do is figure out what the base is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my formula, height squared plus base squared equals hypotenuse squared. I'm going to start to substitute in the values that I have. So here's what I'm going to do. I already know what the height is. The height is 12, so I'm going to write 12 squared. Now, I don't know what the base is. I've got this little question mark here. I really don't know how long that length is. So I'm just going to leave it as b squared. And then last but not least, I know what the hypotenuse is. I do have this length of the hypotenuse. The length is 13. And I'm going to square that. So now what I need to do is a couple of calculations here. I've got to figure out what 12 times 12 is. 12 squared. Please do not say 24. I know a lot of kids will want to do this. 12 times 2 is 24. And that's not correct. What this really means is 12 times 12. I've got to multiply 12 another time. And there's two sets of 12. 12 times 12. So 12 times 12 is 144. I don't know what b is yet. So I'm just going to leave it as base squared. 13 times 13. So I've got 13. I've got to multiply it again. I've got two sets of 13. 13 times 13 is 169. Now, I want to isolate the variable. I want to get b all by itself. So here's what I'm going to do. I see that I have 144 in front of b squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 144 from both sides of the equation. Whatever I do to one side of the equation, I need to do to the other side of the equation. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to end up with base squared. 144 take away 144 is 0. So I've got base squared. I start subtracting. I end up with this. B squared is equal to 25. The base, when I multiply the base by itself, the base times the base, I end up with 25. So now I need to say to myself, what two numbers can I multiply to make 25? But they have to be the same number. Well, if I take the square root of 25, I end up with 5. So my base value is 5. So hopefully that helps you as you go through this. And if you're not understanding something, please do us a favor, pause, write down any notes that make sense to you, rewind the video, and maybe watch it again. So that's how you do the Pythagorean theory. And keep in mind, we knew two of the side lengths. We had to figure out the third side length. Hi, welcome back everybody. We're talking about the Pythagorean theory. And with the Pythagorean theory, if we have a right triangle, we can figure out the third side length if we know the two side lengths. So, for example, right behind me, I've got this right triangle, and I've got 15, 9, and a question mark. And what I need to know is figure out, well, what does the question mark equal? So here's what I'm going to do. I've got my formula back here. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, keep in mind, this only works for a right triangle. So if you have a right triangle, you can use the Pythagorean theory. So here's what we're going to do. First thing we need to do is label this triangle. I need to know what two lengths that I have. Do I have the height and the hypotenuse? Do I have the base and the height? What exactly do I have? So here's how I'm going to label this. If I look at this right angle right here, the best way to remember where your hypotenuse is, and I've said this already a couple of times, but the best way to remember where the hypotenuse is, the right angle always points to it. So if that helps you, please do us a favor. Write that down. If that helps you remember where the hypotenuse is, I'll tell you this much, it has helped me. So anytime I see that right angle, it points to the hypotenuse. So I know one of my side lengths, so that's good. Now, let's pretend that this triangle was sitting on a table or a flat surface, and I'm trying to figure out what side length 9 is. Well, if this triangle is sitting on that table, 9 would end up being my base value. And I'm just going to write the word base. And I go back to my formula. Hey, height plus base equals hypotenuse. I already know where the hypotenuse is. I already know where the base is, which means the value I'm trying to figure out is the height. So I'm going to write height just like this. Now, as I go through this, all I have to do is substitute, go back to my formula, and start substituting in those values. So instead of A, I want to know what my height is. Well, I don't know what it is, thus the question mark. So I'm going to leave A squared exactly the way it is, because remember, I don't know what the height is. Now, I go to the next value, base. Well, I know what my base is. My base is 9 squared. And then last but not least, my hypotenuse. I know what my hypotenuse is. It's 15. So, as I start going through this, I'm going to start doing some calculations. A squared, I can't do anything with A squared. But I do know 9 times 9. 9 times 9. I have two sets of 9. 9 times 9 is 81. And then last but not least, 15 times 15. It's not 15 times 2. A lot of kids will think that way. It's 15 times 15. 15 times 15 is 225. Now, I've got this value after A squared that I need to get rid of. This value after A squared is 81. What I want to do is subtract 81 from both sides of the equation. So when I start to subtract, this is what I end up with. I end up with A squared is equal to, I start doing this subtraction, and I've got an answer of 144. Don't forget to borrow. I can't take 8 away from 2, so I've got to borrow from this hundreds. This now becomes 12. 12 take away 8 is 4. 1 take away 0 is 1. So now, I'm left with this. I'm thinking to myself, A squared is equal to 144. I need to take the square root of 144. So, therefore, what two numbers can I multiply to make 144, but they have to be the same number? The two numbers, 12 times 12. 12 times 12 is 144. So therefore, A is equal to 12. All I did here was this. I took the square root of A squared, and I took the square root of 144. And if you're not totally sure, double check your work by saying to yourself, what's 12 times 12? 12 times 12 is 144. So hopefully that helps you with the Pythagorean theory. It works if you have a right angle, and if you know any two side lengths. Doesn't matter what two side lengths they are, you can figure out the third side length.